April 27th, 1945. 5:47 a.m. The mud is cold. Hatsuko Nakamura can feel it seeping through her uniform, soaking into her knees, into her bones. She's been kneeling for 3 hours now, hands clasped so tightly her fingers have gone numb. Around her, 23 other women kneel in the same position, a line of condemned prisoners in the courtyard of what used to be Baguio's Notre Dame school, now just another corpse of stone and shattered glass in a city of ruins. The sky is turning grey. Dawn is coming. They've been waiting all night for the bullets. Hatsuko is 23 years old. She was a clerk at the Imperial Army Administrative Headquarters, typing requisition forms and casualty reports in a basement office that smelled like mildew and carbon paper. She's never fired a weapon, never treated a wound, never even raised her voice at a superior officer. But she wore the uniform of the Emperor's military, and she knows what that means. The Americans don't distinguish. They can't. Not after everything. She thinks of her mother in Osaka, wonders if the house is still standing, or if the B-29s have reduced it to ash like they've done to half of Japan. Her mother will never know what happened here. Will never know that Hatsuko died properly, with dignity, hands folded in prayer. That's the only comfort left. What happens in the next 4 minutes will defy everything these women believe about their enemy, and 94% of viewers who click away before the 3-minute mark miss the most unbelievable part of this story. Don't be one of them. Beside her, Nurse Kimiko Saito is whispering the Lotus Sutra. Her voice is steady, but Hatsuko can see her hands trembling. Kimiko is 31, married, has 2 children she hasn't seen in 18 months. She'd shown Hatsuko their photograph once, a boy and a girl with gap-toothed smiles, standing in front of a cherry tree in bloom. That photograph is gone now, burned with everything else when the Americans took the building. The Americans? Hatsuko has never actually seen one up close until yesterday. The propaganda posters showed them as demons, fanged monsters with bloody claws, savages who raped and murdered their way across the Pacific. The officers said they skinned prisoners alive. Said they wore Japanese gold teeth as necklaces. Said they laughed while doing it. When the soldiers burst through the basement door yesterday afternoon, Hatsuko had squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the bayonets. But they just shouted, pointed their rifles, herded all 24 women into this courtyard like cattle, and left them here under guard. That was almost 16 hours ago. The waiting is somehow worse than the bullets would be. They're making an example of us, whispers Akari Yoshida, who's kneeling on Hatsuko's left. She's 19, the youngest of them, barely more than a girl. She'd worked in the communication office, translating intercepted American radio chatter. They'll photograph it, show it to their newspapers. Maybe. Probably. The Imperial Army training had been clear. Capture is unforgivable. Death is preferable to the shame of surrender. The enemy knows no honor, no mercy. Hatsuko had memorized those words during orientation in Manila, back when the Philippines were still firmly under Japanese control, back when victory seemed inevitable, back when she was 18 and stupid enough to volunteer for military service because it sounded adventurous. That was 5 years ago, 5 lifetimes ago. Now she kneels in the mud, waiting to pay the price for wearing the wrong uniform in the wrong war. The sky brightens, pink and gold at the edges, beautiful in the way that seems obscene when you're about to die. Hatsuko can see the mountains beyond the ruined city, the Cordillera Range, lush and green and utterly indifferent to the human suffering in its shadow. Birds are starting to sing. How dare they? Then footsteps, heavy boots on gravel. Multiple sets. The women's prayers intensify, a desperate chorus of whispered sutras and half-forgotten childhood songs. Hatsuko's heart hammers against her ribs so hard she thinks it might break through. This is it. She closes her eyes, straightens her spine. She will not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Mother, forgive me. Emperor, I served with loyalty. Buddha, accept this unworthy soul. The footsteps stop. Hatsuko holds her breath. She hears voices, American voices, low and gruff. She doesn't speak English, but she recognizes the cadence of command. Orders being given. Acknowledgements muttered back. Any second now. Any second. Then, a sound that makes no sense. Metal clattering against metal, tin on tin, and is that coffee? The smell hits her like a slap. Real coffee, rich and bitter and completely impossible. Her eyes snap open against her will. An American soldier stands in front of her. He's young, maybe 25, with pale skin burned red by the tropical sun and eyes the color of a winter sky. He's not holding a rifle. He's holding a tray. On it, a tin plate with something that might be beans, a piece of bread, a canteen cup steaming with coffee. He's offering it to her. Hatsuko stares. Her brain cannot process this, cannot fit this moment into any framework she's been given for understanding the world. The soldier says something in English. His tone is gentle. He gestures with the tray, encouraging her to take it. She doesn't move. Physically cannot move. This must be a trick. A cruel joke before the execution. Or poison. Yes, that must be it. They'll make them eat poison so they don't have to waste bullets. But up and down the line, other soldiers are doing the same thing. Handing out trays to each woman. 24 soldiers, 24 breakfasts, like some kind of absurd, impossible miracle. Kimiko takes hers with shaking hands, stares at it like it might bite her. Akari starts to cry, deep, shuddering sobs that shake her whole body. The soldier in front of Hatsuko sets the tray down in the mud at her knees, gives her a small nod, and steps back. Not threatening, not demanding, just offering. Breakfast. They brought them breakfast. Before we continue, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? Let's see how far this story reaches. Hatsuko's hands move on their own, pick up the cup, feel its warmth. Real warmth. Her fingers, numb from hours of prayer, begin to thaw. Steam rises in the cool morning air. The sun breaks over the mountain ridge, flooding the courtyard with light. And 24 Japanese women, who knelt in the mud preparing to die, sit in stunned silence as their enemies feed them breakfast like human beings. The war, for just this one moment, stops making sense. What happens next will challenge everything both sides believed about each other and force one American captain to make a choice that could end his career or change the course of history. Hatsuko Nakamura was never supposed to be a soldier. She was supposed to be a wife, a mother, maybe a school teacher in Osaka, standing in front of neat rows of children, teaching them calligraphy and mathematics and proper respect for their elders. That was the future her parents had imagined when she was born in 1922, the second daughter in a family of modest means but respectable standing. The war changed those plans. The war changed everyone's plans. In the spring of 1940, when Hatsuko was 18, the neighborhood association held a meeting. A recruitment officer from the Imperial Army stood at the front of the community hall, crisp and proud in his uniform, and explained that the empire needed patriots. Not just men, women too, clerks, nurses, administrators. The glorious expansion throughout Asia required infrastructure, required organization, required loyal servants of the emperor willing to serve beyond Japan's shores. Hatsuko's father had lost his job at the textile factory 3 months earlier. Her older sister was already married off, one less mouth to feed. The military promised a salary, room and board, and honor. She volunteered the next day. She wasn't alone. By 1945, over 100,000 Japanese women served in military or military-adjacent roles across the Pacific Theater. They weren't combat troops, imperial doctrine forbade that, but they were essential to the war machine nonetheless. Nurses in field hospitals, clerks processing the mountains of paperwork that modern warfare demanded, telephone operators, translators. Some, like Kimiko Saito, were trained medical professionals. Others, like Hatsuko, were just girls who could type. The training at the facility outside Tokyo lasted 6 weeks. They learned military protocol, how to salute properly, how to address officers, how to maintain discretion about classified information. They learned to march in formation, though they'd never carry rifles. They learned the Emperor's rescript to soldiers and sailors by heart. Bear in mind that duty is weightier than a mountain, while death is lighter than a feather. They learned what capture meant. Major Tanaka, who led their orientation, had been unambiguous. "The Americans are not like us," he'd said, pacing in front of the assembled women with his hands clasped behind his back. "They do not understand honor. They do not respect the Bushido code. If you are captured, you will be violated, tortured, killed in ways I will not describe to preserve your innocence. But know this, death in service is honorable. Surrender is eternal shame, not just for you, but for your families." He'd let that sink in. "You each carry a small capsule in your medical kit," he'd continued. "You know what it is. You know what it's for. If capture becomes inevitable, you know what you must do." Cyanide. Hatsuko had checked her kit obsessively for the first month after arriving in Manila in August 1941. The tiny glass capsule wrapped in cotton. Just bite down. 30 seconds of pain, then peace. Better than the alternative. By the time she'd been transferred to Baguio in 1944, she'd stopped checking. The capsule was there. That was enough. She tried not to think about it. Baguio was supposed to be safe. The summer capital of the Philippines, a mountain retreat 1,500 meters above sea level, where the air was cool and pine trees grew like they did back home. The Japanese had controlled it since 1942. By 1944, with American forces advancing, it became a fortress. Tunnels carved into the mountains. Headquarters moved underground. Soldiers everywhere, digging in, preparing for a siege that everyone knew was coming, but no one wanted to name. Hatsuko typed reports, casualty lists growing longer each week, supply requisitions for materials that never arrived, communications from Tokyo that grew increasingly desperate, increasingly detached from reality. She worked 12-hour days in a basement office lit by kerosene lamps because electricity was rationed. She slept in a converted classroom with 11 other women on thin mattresses that smelled like mildew. She ate rice that was more gravel than grain, supplemented with whatever vegetables could be scrounged from the mountain gardens. She was hungry all the time, tired all the time, scared all the time, though she never said it out loud. None of them did. Kimiko Saito, the nurse who'd been kneeling beside her in the mud this morning, had joined the service for different reasons. She was already married, already a mother, already a trained nurse when the war started. But her husband had been conscripted in 1942, sent to Burma, and she'd received no letters for over a year. Working for the military meant steady pay sent directly to her mother-in-law, who was caring for Kimiko's children in Yokohama. "When the war is over," Kimiko had told Hatsuko one night in their shared quarters, "I'll go home. My husband will come home. We'll plant a garden and I'll never leave my children again." Hatsuko had wanted to believe her, had wanted to believe any of them would go home. By April 1945, that belief was harder to maintain. They could hear the American artillery getting closer, feel the building shake with each bombardment. The officers stopped pretending everything was under control. Supplies ran out. The wounded filled every available room. Orders became contradictory, then stopped coming altogether. On April 26th, the day before the Americans broke through, Lieutenant Oshiro had gathered all the women in the basement. His uniform was filthy, his face gaunt. He'd been a gentle superior, one of the few officers who treated the women with basic respect. "The enemy will be here soon," he'd said quietly. "Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps tonight. You must understand, they will not take prisoners. Not after what they've seen. Not after Bataan, Leyte, Manila. His voice cracked. You know what you must do. For your honor. For your families. For the Emperor. Then he'd bowed, a superior officer bowing to them, and left. That night, none of the women slept. They sat in clusters, holding hands, praying, crying quietly. Hatsuko had finally taken the cyanide capsule from her medical kit, held it in her palm, felt its weight. Death is lighter than a feather. But when the Americans burst through the door the next afternoon, shouting in English, rifles raised, eyes wild with adrenaline and fear, Hatsuko hadn't bitten down. She'd frozen, dropped the capsule, raised her hands. All 24 women had surrendered. The shame of it was crushing. Everything they'd been taught, every principle they'd internalized, shattered in an instant of pure animal survival instinct. They'd failed the Emperor, failed their families, failed themselves. And now they'd knelt in the mud all night, waiting for the Americans to execute them for that failure. Except the Americans had brought breakfast instead. Hatsuko sits in the mud, holding the tin cup of coffee, steam warming her face, and her entire understanding of the world tilts on its axis. These were supposed to be monsters. Why were they acting like human beings? To understand why mercy was impossible, you need to understand what came before the breakfast. You need to understand Bataan. Captain Robert Fowler, 37th Infantry Division, remembers Bataan like other men remember their wedding day. Every detail crystal clear, forever seared into memory. Except Fowler's memories don't include joy. They include corpses stacked like cordwood along a jungle road. And the flies, God, the flies were everywhere. It's April 1945, and Fowler is 32 years old. Before the war, he taught 8th grade history at Jefferson Middle School in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. He had 14 students in his homeroom class. He knew all their names, their parents' names, which kids needed extra help with fractions, and which ones snuck comic books into their textbooks during lectures. He was good at his job, patient, fair, the kind of teacher students remembered fondly decades later. That man feels like a stranger now. The Robert Fowler who stands in the courtyard of the ruined Notre Dame school, watching his men distribute breakfast rations to captured Japanese women, has seen things that Jefferson Middle School never prepared him for. He's seen what war does to the human body when a flamethrower catches you, seen what infection does to a gut wound when there's no morphine left, seen what happens to prisoners when the guards decide the Geneva Convention is just a piece of paper that doesn't apply in the jungle. He enlisted in December 1941, 4 days after Pearl Harbor. Commissioned as an officer by March 1942 because he had a college degree, and the Army needed leaders more than it needed time to train them properly. Shipped to the Pacific by August. By September, he was in New Guinea with the 37th Infantry Division, the WWII Division, mostly Ohio National Guard troops, good men who'd signed up expecting to serve 1 weekend a month, and instead found themselves in hell's furnace. The 37th fought through New Guinea, then the Solomon Islands, then Leyte. Jungle warfare, the worst kind. You couldn't see the enemy until he was on top of you. Every tree could hide a sniper, every cave could be a tomb. Disease killed as many men as bullets, malaria, dengue fever, dysentery that turned your insides to water. But the worst part wasn't the jungle or the disease, or even the dying. The worst part was what men did to each other. Fowler had been with the division when they'd helped liberate Allied POWs at Leyte in October 1944. Liberated. That was the official term. But you can't liberate a man who's already been destroyed. The Japanese had held them for 3 years, American soldiers, Filipino fighters, some British and Australian troops. The POW camp was a coastal facility that smelled like death from 100 yards away. When Fowler's unit breached the perimeter, They found men who looked like skeletons wrapped in skin, barely alive, beaten, starved. Some had been tortured, fingernails ripped out, burns from cigarettes, and worse, infections left untreated until gangrene set in. One of the prisoners, a Marine from Baltimore, had grabbed Fowler's arm with a grip that was all bone. "They made us watch," he'd whispered, his voice like gravel. "Made us watch what they did to the ones who tried to escape. They laughed. They fucking laughed." The Marine had weighed 83 pounds. Before the war, he'd been a college football player. Fowler had thrown up behind the barracks afterward. He wasn't the only one. And then there was Bataan itself. Not the battle, which happened before the 37th arrived in the Philippines, but the aftermath, the death march, the stories that filtered through military intelligence, refugee accounts, escaped prisoners who'd somehow survived to tell about it. In April 1942, 75,000 Filipino and American troops had surrendered to the Japanese after a desperate 3-month defense of the Bataan Peninsula. The Japanese forced them to march 65 miles to prison camps in heat that topped 100 degrees. No water, no food, no medical care. Men who fell were bayoneted or shot. Men who asked for water were beaten to death. The Japanese soldiers used prisoners for bayonet practice, for sport, for target shooting. Somewhere between 5,000 and 18,000 Filipino and American soldiers died on that march. The exact number would never be known because many bodies were never recovered. The men of the 37th Infantry Division knew these stories, carried them like stones in their chests. They also knew about Manila. In February 1945, as American forces liberated the Philippine capital, the retreating Japanese forces had gone on a rampage. Massacres of Filipino civilians, mass rapes, hospitals burned with patients still inside, babies bayoneted in front of their mothers, over 100,000 Filipino civilians dead in a month of systematic atrocity that military historians would later compare to the rape of Nanking. The 37th had been part of the force that fought through Manila. They'd seen the results firsthand. So when Fowler's battalion advanced into Baguio in late April, the men weren't thinking about mercy. They were thinking about payback. The Japanese military had earned its reputation for brutality honestly. Bushido code twisted into something that made cruelty a virtue and surrender unthinkable. Soldiers who'd been taught that enemies weren't human, that conquest was destiny, that dying for the emperor was the highest honor. The Imperial Army didn't take many prisoners. Neither did the Americans by that point in the war. It wasn't official policy. But it happened. A lot. Japanese soldiers didn't surrender easily. They'd been conditioned to fight to the death, to take as many enemies with them as possible. Even wounded Japanese troops would detonate grenades when Americans approached. Fake surrenders that ended with hidden weapons, bodies booby-trapped with explosives. After a while, American soldiers stopped taking chances, stopped accepting surrenders, shot first. The dehumanization ran both ways. American propaganda posters depicted Japanese soldiers as yellow-skinned rats with buck teeth and claws. Jap hunting licenses circulated as jokes among troops. Some soldiers collected Japanese skulls as trophies and sent them home. President Roosevelt himself had been gifted a letter opener made from a Japanese soldier's arm bone. He'd returned it, disgusted, but the fact that someone thought it was appropriate speaks volumes. This was total war, industrial-scale slaughter spanning half the globe. The normal rules of civilization had been suspended, and everyone knew it. So when Fowler's men discovered 24 Japanese women in the basement of the administrative building on April 26th, their first instinct wasn't compassion. Sergeant Bill Morrison from Akron, good man, wife and 2 kids back home, coached Little League before the war, had leveled his M1 Garand at the huddled women and said, "Sir, we doing this quick or we leaving them for the MPs?" Not a question of whether, just how. 3 other soldiers had nodded agreement. They'd just lost 2 men clearing this building. Private Chen, 20 years old, shot by a sniper in the stairwell, and Corporal Davidson, killed by a grenade rigged to a door handle. The blood was still fresh on the walls. These women wore the same uniform as the soldiers who'd killed Chen and Davidson. Same uniform as the guards who'd run the camps at Leyte. Same uniform as the soldiers who'd committed the Manila massacre. Same uniform. Same enemy. Every tactical manual, every battlefield instinct, every ounce of rage and grief accumulated over years of brutal warfare said, eliminate the threat. Move on. Don't think about it. But Fowler had looked at those 24 women, terrified, unarmed, some of them barely older than his students back in Cedar Rapids, and he'd hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. The battle for Baguio begins on April 23, 1945, with an artillery barrage that shakes the mountains. Hatsuko is in the basement office when the first shells hit. The kerosene lamp swings wildly overhead. Dust rains from the ceiling. The typewriter on her desk rattles like chattering teeth. Get down! Someone screams, and 20 women drop to the floor in unison, hands over their heads, as the building shudders above them. The Americans have arrived. For weeks, everyone knew they were coming. You could hear the artillery creeping closer each day, a distant thunder that gradually grew into an earthquake. Japanese defensive positions in the outer mountains had fallen one by one. Nagilian, San Fernando, each name another domino toppling toward Baguio. Now the dominoes have run out. The 37th Infantry Division, along with elements of the 33rd Infantry Division and Filipino guerrilla units, have surrounded the city. Major General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, the brilliant tactician who'd conquered Singapore, commands the Japanese defense from his headquarters in the mountain tunnels. But brilliance can't overcome mathematics. Yamashita has roughly 30,000 troops in the Baguio area, cut off from supply lines, low on ammunition, running out of food. The Americans have over 100,000 men in the Luzon campaign, backed by total air superiority and naval guns that can pulverize a mountain if given the coordinates. The outcome isn't in question. Only the body count. The shelling continues for 3 days. Hatsuko and the other women huddle in the basement, forbidden to leave, listening to the world tear itself apart overhead. The building takes several direct hits. Part of the 3rd floor collapses. The windows all blow out. Chunks of masonry crash down through the floors. They run out of food on day 2, water on day 3. Japanese soldiers stream through the basement, retreating deeper into the tunnel network, carrying wounded men who scream with every jostle. Some of the soldiers are boys, 16, 17 years old, conscripted from the last desperate call-ups. Others are veterans, hollow-eyed and filthy, who've been fighting since China, since Manchuria, since the war began. None of them make eye contact with the women. On April 26th, the artillery stops. The silence is somehow worse than the noise. Hatsuko huddles with Kimiko and 6 other women in the corner of the basement, behind a filing cabinet that's been toppled over. They can hear small arms fire now. Close, the sharp crack of rifles, the stutter of machine guns, the occasional crump of a grenade. Building to building, floor to floor. The Americans are inside the city. Lieutenant Oshiro appears one final time, around mid-afternoon. His uniform is shredded, his left arm wrapped in a bloody bandage. He looks at the assembled women with something like pity. The enemy will be here soon, he tells them. Perhaps in an hour, perhaps less. You must understand what they will do to you. He doesn't elaborate, doesn't need to. The propaganda has been relentless for years, American soldiers as rapists and murderers who take special pleasure in violating Japanese women. Do what you must to preserve your honor, Oshiro says quietly. I'm sorry I cannot protect you. I'm sorry for all of this. Then he bows, that same bow, deep and formal, an officer showing respect to subordinates he knows he's sending to their deaths, and disappears up the stairwell. They never see him again. Hatsuko will later learn that Lieutenant Oshiro died in the tunnel system 3 days later, leading a hopeless counterattack against American positions. He was 28 years old. But in the basement, in the final hours of Japanese control, 24 women face their mortality. Some pray. Some weep silently. Some write final letters to families they'll never see again, knowing the letters will never be delivered, but needing to write them anyway. 19-year-old Akari Yoshida, the translator who'd worked in communications, sits with her cyanide capsule in her palm, staring at it like it holds the answers to the universe. "Does it hurt?" She whispers to Kimiko, the nurse. Kimiko doesn't sugarcoat it. Yes, but not for long. Akari nods, tucks the capsule into her cheek, ready to bite down when the moment comes. Hatsuko can't stop shaking. She's cold despite the humid heat, her body shuddering with adrenaline and terror and exhaustion. She hasn't slept in 3 days, hasn't eaten in 2. Her mind feels disconnected from her body, floating somewhere above, watching this frightened girl crouch behind a filing cabinet, waiting to die. This is how it ends, she thinks. Not with glory, not with purpose, just fear and darkness in a basement in a city I never wanted to come to, for a war I never understood. The sounds of fighting grow closer, boots thundering overhead, American voices shouting commands in harsh English syllables, crashes and bangs as they clear rooms. Then, footsteps on the stairwell, coming down. The women press back against the wall. Several bite down on their capsules, choosing poison over capture. Hatsuko's hand moves to her own capsule, but her fingers won't obey. She fumbles it, drops it, watches it roll across the floor and disappear into a crack in the masonry. No time to find it. The door explodes inward, kicked open with brutal efficiency. American soldiers flood in, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the dust and darkness. They're huge, or they seem huge, these men in helmets and filthy uniforms, faces streaked with dirt and sweat and something that might be blood. They're shouting, all of them shouting at once. English words that mean nothing to Hatsuko, but the intent is clear. Don't move. Hands up. Don't move. She raises her hands. They're all raising their hands, those who haven't taken the poison, surrendering like they were taught never to do. A soldier points his rifle directly at Hatsuko's face. She can see down the barrel, into that dark hole where death lives. His finger is on the trigger. His eyes are wild. He's terrified, she realizes. Just as terrified as she is. Time stretches. Nobody breathes. Then another voice, deeper, with authority. "Hold fire! Hold fire!" An officer pushes through the soldiers. Older than the others, maybe 30, with captain's bars on his collar and eyes that take in the scene instantly. 24 women, unarmed, in military uniforms, yes, but clearly non-combatants. No weapons, no grenades, just terrified girls and women pressed against the basement wall with their hands up. The officer, Captain Robert Fowler, though Hatsuko won't learn his name for days, stares at them for a long moment. Then he lowers his own weapon. "Secure them," he orders. "Search for weapons, but don't. Just secure them. Get them upstairs to the courtyard. We'll figure out what to do with them." What to do with them? The soldiers herd the women up the stairs at gunpoint, roughly but without actual violence. They're searched, pat-downs that are humiliating but professional. No weapons found because there are no weapons to find. They're pushed into the courtyard, told to kneel, surrounded by guards. And there they stay as the sun sets, and darkness falls, and the sounds of battle gradually fade. There they stay as Japanese resistance in Baguio crumbles, and the city falls completely under American control. There they stay, all through the night, waiting. Some of the women who took cyanide die within minutes. Hatsuko watches Yuki Tanaka, 21 years old, a clerk from Sapporo who loved to sing, convulse and go still. The Americans try to help her, but there's nothing to be done. By dawn, 4 women are dead from poison. 20 remain. 20 women kneeling in the mud, certain they'll be next. Certain that the Americans who showed brief mercy during capture will show the normal brutality of war once officers and protocols and revenge take over. The sun rises, the women pray, and the soldiers come. But not with rifles, with breakfast. The argument starts at 05:45 hours, 12 minutes before the sun breaches the mountain ridge. Captain Robert Fowler stands in what used to be the school's administration office, now a pile of rubble and broken furniture, and faces Sergeant Bill Morrison, who's red-faced and barely controlling his volume. "They're enemy combatants, sir," Morrison says, each word bitten off sharp. "They were in a military facility, wearing military uniforms. Geneva Convention is pretty damn clear about what we can do with enemy combatants. They're clerks and nurses," Fowler replies, keeping his voice level. "Non-combatants. Geneva Convention is also pretty damn clear about that." Were they non-combatants when Chen got shot? When Davidson's guts got blown across the hallway? They didn't pull those triggers, Sergeant. They wore the same uniform as the bastards who did. It's not an unfair point. Fowler knows it's not unfair. The same argument has been rattling around his own skull since yesterday afternoon when they'd discovered the women in the basement. He hadn't slept. Couldn't sleep. He'd spent the night walking the perimeter, checking positions, avoiding the decision he knew he'd have to make come morning. Command hasn't weighed in yet. Communication with Battalion HQ is spotty. Too much fighting, too many priorities. The standing orders for POWs are vague in the best circumstances, deliberately so. Capture when possible. Interrogate for intelligence value. Process according to resources available. But there are no facilities to process prisoners here. No MPs to handle custody. No transportation to move them to proper POW camps. Baguio is still a combat zone. Pockets of Japanese resistance throughout the tunnel system, snipers in the hills, the situation fluid and dangerous. The practical thing, the expedient thing, would be to execute the prisoners. It happens. More than anyone wants to admit, it happens. Enemy combatants in combat zones, no facilities to hold them, no time to deal with them properly. A bullet each, a mass grave, a brief note in the after-action report. Casualties of war. No one back home would know. No one would care. Fowler had seen the look in Morrison's eyes yesterday, seen the same look in half a dozen other soldiers. They wanted this. Needed this, maybe. Payback for everything they'd seen and lost. He'd almost given the order, almost. But then he'd made the mistake of actually looking at the women, really looking. There was one. He'd later learn her name was Hatsuko Nakamura, who couldn't have been more than 23, 24 years old. Same age as his niece back in Cedar. Rapids. She had the same slight build, the same way of hunching her shoulders when scared. She'd looked at him with eyes that expected death and accepted it, but underneath the acceptance was just a kid. A terrified kid who probably volunteered because she needed money or adventure or because everyone else was doing it. All the same stupid reasons 18-year-olds have made stupid decisions since the beginning of time. She reminded him of his students, and Robert Fowler, who'd spent the last 3 years learning how to kill efficiently and lead men through nightmares, suddenly remembered that he used to be a teacher, used to believe that education and humanity and civilization mattered, used to think that was what they were fighting for, not revenge, not blood, but the preservation of something better than the barbarism the enemy represented. If he executed these women, what was he preserving? What was he becoming? So he'd ordered them secured instead of shot, bought himself 12 hours to figure out what the hell to do next. Now it's dawn, and he's out of time. Morrison is still talking. "Sir, with respect, the men aren't going to understand this. We've got dead brothers who won't get to go home, and you want to, what, feed the enemy? Protect them?" "I want to follow the Geneva Convention," Fowler says quietly. I want to be better than them. Better. Sir, have you forgotten Bataan? Forgotten what we found at Leyte? These people don't play by Geneva Convention rules. So we sink to their level? We survive, sir. We win. And we don't waste resources on enemy soldiers who'd slit our throats given half a chance. Fowler turns to face Morrison fully. The sergeant is a good man. Truly good. One of the best NCOs Fowler has ever served with. Family man. Volunteers for the dangerous assignments to keep younger soldiers safer. The kind of soldier who holds a dying private's hand and lies to him that he'll be fine, make it home, see his mother again. Morrison isn't wrong. He's just war-tired. They all are. Tell me something, Bill, Fowler says. What are we going to tell people after this war? Our kids, our grandkids, when they ask what we did? Morrison's jaw works. We'll tell them we fought, we won. And when they ask how we won, what we did to win? Fowler shakes his head. I need to be able to live with my answer to that question. I need to sleep at night for the next 50 years, assuming I make it that long. Silence. Outside, the sky is turning pink. The women have been kneeling all night. Get rations, Fowler says finally. 20 women, 20 rations. Coffee if we've got it, water minimum. Morrison stares. Sir, that's an order, Sergeant. The men are soldiers in the United States Army, and they follow orders, my orders. Fowler's voice hardens. I'm not asking them to like it. I'm not asking for their approval. I'm asking them to be soldiers, not murderers. There's a difference, and if we forget that difference, then what the hell are we even fighting for? Morrison's face works through several emotions. Anger, frustration, resignation. Finally, yes, sir. He leaves. Fowler can hear him barking orders outside, the clatter of gear, grumbling from the enlisted men. Fowler closes his eyes. He might have just ended his career. Might be court-martialed for wasting military resources. Might lose the respect of his men, which is worse than any official punishment. But he thinks about Hatsuko Nakamura's face, thinks about his niece, thinks about the 8th graders he used to teach, and how he'd want someone to treat them if they were captured and terrified in a foreign land. He thinks about the man he was before the war, and the man he wants to be after it. Then he straightens his shoulders and walks outside to face whatever comes next. The women are still kneeling. They haven't moved in 12 hours. Some are swaying with exhaustion. Their lips move in prayer. They see him coming, and the prayers intensify. Fowler takes a deep breath. Distribute the rations, he orders. Show them we mean no harm, slowly, no sudden movements. They're terrified. 20 soldiers, many of them clearly unhappy with this assignment, move forward with metal trays. The women flinch. Some close their eyes. One starts crying. And then, the moment that will define everything. A young private named Eddie Coleman from Des Moines kneels down next to one of the women and offers her a tray with a shy, awkward gentleness, like he's approaching a wounded animal he doesn't want to spook. The woman, Kimiko Saito, the nurse with 2 children, stares at the food like it's appeared from another dimension. She doesn't take it at first. None of them do. So Coleman sets it down in front of her, says something in English that she doesn't understand, but his tone is kind, encouraging. He backs away, hands visible, non-threatening. Up and down the line, other soldiers do the same, following Coleman's example, setting down trays, backing away, giving space. Fowler watches one of his men, Private James Chen's cousin, for God's sake, the kid whose relative died yesterday in this very building, set down a tray for one of the Japanese women with shaking hands. There are tears on the private's face. But he does it. Sets down the tray. Steps back. Slowly, hesitantly, the women begin to reach for the food. Steam rises from 20 tin cups in the cool mountain air. The sun breaks over the ridge, flooding everything with golden light. And Captain Robert Fowler, who taught history to middle schoolers and never imagined he'd be making decisions about life and death, watches as his men feed the enemy and wonders if maybe, just maybe, there's still some humanity left in this God-forsaken war. Morrison appears at his elbow, voice low. "Sir, what do we do with them after this?" Fowler doesn't have an answer yet. He's making this up as he goes, one decision at a time, hoping he doesn't get everyone killed. "We treat them like human beings," he says finally, "and we figure out the rest later." It's not much of a plan, but it's all he's got. Behind them, a Japanese woman, Hatsuko, lifts a cup of coffee to her lips with trembling hands and takes her first sip. She starts to cry, silent tears streaming down her face as she drinks. Fowler turns away. Can't watch. His own eyes are burning. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbles. The war continues. But in this courtyard, for just this moment, it pauses. And in that pause, 20 women who expected to die learn that mercy is still possible. Even here, even now, even from the enemy. Section 6. The breakfast that stopped time. Hatsuko's hands won't stop shaking. She holds the tin cup, warm, impossibly warm, and brings it to her lips. The coffee is bitter, weak, nothing like the tea ceremonies of home. But it's hot and real, and she's drinking it instead of dying. And her brain still can't reconcile these two facts. Around her, the other women are experiencing the same cognitive dissonance. Kimiko takes a small bite of the bread, chews mechanically, swallows. Tears stream down her face. She's not sobbing, just silent tears, endless, like something broken inside her is finally releasing. Akari, the 19-year-old translator, won't touch her food. She stares at it with wild eyes. "It's poisoned," she whispers in Japanese. "It must be. Why else would they? It's not poisoned." Kimiko says quietly. She's the nurse, the oldest, the one they've been looking to for guidance. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. They wouldn't waste rations. Then why? Akari's voice cracks. Why are they doing this? Nobody has an answer. The American soldiers stand in a loose perimeter, rifles lowered but ready. They're not friendly. Not exactly. But they're not brutal either. They just watch, uncomfortable, like they're not sure what they're supposed to do with enemy prisoners who won't stop crying. One soldier, young, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles that remind Hatsuko absurdly of a character from an American comic book she'd once seen, catches her eye. He looks away quickly, embarrassed. He's afraid of us, Hatsuko realizes with shock. Or maybe not afraid, but uncertain. We're not what he expected. What had he expected? Monsters, probably. The same propaganda worked both ways. Private Eddie Coleman, the soldier from Des Moines who'd first knelt with the tray, lights a cigarette. Without thinking, he offers one to Kimiko. She stares at it. At him. At the offering. Slowly she reaches out and takes it. Coleman lights it for her with his Zippo, and Kimiko inhales like she's breathing in salvation itself. She hasn't had a cigarette in 3 months. Tobacco ran out in Baguio back in January. "Thank you," she says in careful, accented English. 2 words she'd learned years ago, never thinking she'd use them like this. Coleman nods, looking relieved to have done something right. "You're welcome, Ma'am." Ma'am. He called her Ma'am. The formality of it, the basic human respect, breaks something in Kimiko. She covers her face with her free hand and weeps openly now, shoulders shaking. The American soldiers shift uncomfortably. One mutters something. Another shakes his head. Captain Fowler appears, surveying the scene. His face is unreadable. He says something in English to his men, a question it sounds like. Sergeant Morrison responds, still clearly unhappy but maintaining discipline. Fowler nods, then does something extraordinary. He walks directly to the women, stops a respectful distance away, and addresses them in slow, clear English, knowing they won't understand the words, but hoping the tone carries, "You are prisoners of war under the protection of the United States Army. You will not be harmed. You will be treated according to military law." Hatsuko doesn't understand the words, but she understands something in his eyes, a deliberate choice to see them as human beings instead of targets. She bows her head. It's instinctive, this gesture of gratitude and respect. Several other women do the same. The Americans look even more uncomfortable. This isn't how war is supposed to work. There are supposed to be clear lines, us and them, good and evil, victors and vanquished. But in this courtyard, as the sun rises higher and the coffee cools and the women slowly, hesitantly eat the food they've been given, those lines blur. One of the soldiers produces a med kit and approaches a woman with a badly infected cut on her arm. She flinches violently, but he holds up his hands. See? Just bandages. Just medicine. Kimiko, the nurse, intervenes. She gestures. "Let me. I can help." The soldier looks to Fowler. Fowler nods. And so Kimiko, a Japanese military nurse, treats one of her countrywomen using American medical supplies while American soldiers watch, and the absurdity of it is almost too much to bear. "What happens now?" Hatsuko asks quietly, in Japanese, to no one in particular. Kimiko finishes wrapping the bandage. "I don't know," she admits. "I don't think they know either." But for the first time since the war began, Hatsuko feels something she'd thought was dead. Hope. Maybe they'll survive this. Maybe, impossibly, they'll see home again. The breakfast continues. 20 women and 30 American soldiers sharing a courtyard and a moment of humanity in the middle of a war that's supposed to make such moments impossible. It won't last, can't last. The war is still raging. But for now, for this one breakfast, mercy wins. Section 7. The days that followed, the women spent 3 days in American custody at Baguio before being transported to the POW processing facility in Manila. 3 days that reshape everything they thought they knew about the enemy. Captain Fowler assigns 2 soldiers, Coleman and a corporal named Martinez, to oversee the prisoners. Their job: ensure security, provide rations, prevent incidents in both directions. It's awkward work. None of the Americans speak Japanese. Only 2 of the women speak fragmentary English. But humans find ways to communicate. Kimiko becomes the informal liaison. Her English is rough but functional. She explains that the women need privacy for sanitation, need different sleeping arrangements than male prisoners would. Fowler listens and accommodates when possible. The women are moved to a partially intact building, given blankets, provided 2 meals a day, more food than they've seen in months. A female army nurse, Lieutenant Patricia O'Brien from the Medical Corps, comes to examine them. Several have untreated infections, malnutrition, parasites. O'Brien treats them all with brisk efficiency and surprising gentleness. "They're just kids," O'Brien tells Fowler afterward. "Half of them are younger than my sister. What the hell were the Japanese thinking, putting them in a combat zone?" "The same thing we're thinking," Fowler doesn't say, sending 18-year-olds to die on beaches and in jungles. On the second day, intelligence officers arrive to interrogate the prisoners. The questioning is firm but not brutal. Names, ranks, duties, what they know about remaining Japanese positions in the mountains. Hatsuko tells them everything. There's no point in resistance, no secrets worth protecting. She was a clerk. She typed forms. She knows nothing of strategic value. But Akari, the translator, knows plenty. Communication intercepts, code procedures, officer names and positions. She gives it all up without hesitation, and later confesses to Kimiko, "If it saves lives, American or Japanese, I don't care anymore. I just want this to end." By day 3, an odd routine has developed. The women bow politely when soldiers bring food. The soldiers nod awkwardly back. Coleman shows photographs of his farm in Iowa to Kimiko, pointing and naming things. Cow, horse, barn. Kimiko teaches him the Japanese words in return, and they both laugh at his terrible pronunciation. It's not friendship. The power imbalance and the circumstances prevent that. But it's not enmity either. When the trucks arrive on April 30th to transport the women to Manila, several of the soldiers actually help them load their meager belongings. Morrison, who'd wanted them executed, hands Kimiko an extra pack of cigarettes. Says nothing. Just hands it to her and walks away. Hatsuko watches the ruined city of Baguio disappear behind the truck convoy. She'd expected to die there. Instead, she's alive, headed to an uncertain future. But alive. Captain Fowler doesn't come to see them off. He's already back in the mountains, leading his men through tunnel systems, fighting the war that hasn't stopped, just because 20 women got mercy instead of bullets. But as the truck bounces down the mountain road, Hatsuko thinks about the breakfast. About the coffee that tasted like forgiveness. About the American captain who chose humanity when revenge would have been easier. She doesn't know his name yet. Won't learn it for months, but she'll never forget his face. Section 8. The Official Reckoning. The report reaches General MacArthur's headquarters in Manila on May 3, 1945. Subject: Treatment of Japanese female POWs, Baguio Operation. Summary: CPT Robert Fowler, 37th Infantry Division, utilized combat rations to feed 24 captured Japanese female military personnel, subsequently provided medical care, and arranged transport to POW facilities per Geneva Convention protocols. The response is complicated. On one hand, Fowler technically followed the Geneva Convention. On the other hand, resources are tight, the fighting is brutal, and some officers view his actions as unnecessarily soft. There's grumbling in certain quarters about coddling the enemy. But there's also recognition of the intelligence value. The women's cooperation led to actionable intelligence about Japanese tunnel networks and remaining force positions. Akari's communications knowledge helped break several code variations. 3 Japanese officers surrendered after learning their female staff had been treated humanely. They'd expected atrocities and found mercy instead. MacArthur's chief of staff writes a single line in the margin of the report. "This is how we win the peace." Fowler receives no medal, no official commendation, but he also receives no reprimand. The incident is quietly noted in his service record as effective POW management in combat conditions. Years later, Fowler will laugh bitterly at that phrase. Management, like I was running a warehouse instead of choosing whether to kill 20 women. But the decision creates ripples. Other units begin following similar protocols with non-combatant prisoners. The success of the intelligence gathered makes pragmatic officers reconsider the value of humane treatment. Not everyone complies. Atrocities continue on both sides through the end of the war, but the needle moves slightly toward mercy. By August, when Japan surrenders, the Allied POW system has processed thousands of Japanese prisoners, including hundreds of women. The protocols established in part by Fowler's improvised decision in Baguio become standard procedure during the occupation. History will barely notice. It's a footnote in a war of footnotes. But for 20 women, it's everything. Section 9. After the surrender. Hatsuko returns to Japan in March 1946 on a repatriation ship crowded with former soldiers, nurses, civilians, all the scattered pieces of the empire, coming home to ruins. Osaka is ash. Her childhood home is a foundation and a chimney. Her mother survived, living with relatives in the countryside, but her father died in the firebombing of March 1945. Hatsuko's older sister lost her husband at Okinawa. They are a nation of widows and orphans and survivors who carry invisible wounds. For Hatsuko, the shame of surrender is complicated by gratitude for survival. Some returning soldiers face ostracism for not dying honorably. Some women who were captured face whispered accusations about what they must have done to survive American custody. Hatsuko doesn't talk about Baguio, doesn't mention the breakfast, the kindness, the mercy. It doesn't fit the narrative her country needs. Stories of honorable sacrifice, of victims of American brutality, of noble defeat. So she stays quiet, rebuilds her life, becomes a teacher, like she'd planned before the war. Marries a quiet man who'd lost a leg at Iwo Jima. They have 2 daughters. She teaches them English, history, and the importance of seeing humanity in everyone. She never forgets Captain Fowler. In 1972, 27 years after the breakfast, Hatsuko receives a letter. It's from an American veterans organization researching the Baguio campaign. They're trying to locate the Japanese women who were captured on April 26, 1945. Captain Fowler, now retired, living in California, wants to know what happened to them. Hatsuko writes back immediately. 3 months later, she's on a plane to San Francisco with 2 other survivors, Kimiko and Akari. The others have died, moved on, or declined to participate. But these 3 want to say thank you. The reunion happens in a VFW hall in Sacramento. Robert Fowler is 60 years old, grey-haired, wearing a suit instead of a uniform. He looks smaller than Hatsuko remembers, more fragile. He stands when they enter. They bow. He extends his hand. Hatsuko takes it, and through a translator says, "You gave us our lives. We came to say thank you." Fowler's eyes fill with tears. I just gave you breakfast." "You gave us humanity," Kimiko corrects gently. "When we expected death, that was everything." They talk for 3 hours, share stories, look at photographs. Fowler introduces his wife, his children, his grandchildren. The women show pictures of their own families, the children and grandchildren who exist because mercy won over vengeance on one April morning. Before they leave, Akari, the youngest, now 46 years old, says something that makes Fowler weep openly. "We were taught you were monsters, and you taught us we were wrong. Thank you for being human when it was hard." Fowler dies in 1989, 17 years later. His obituary in the Cedar Rapids Gazette mentions his service in the Pacific, his Bronze Star and Purple Heart, his 40 years teaching middle school after the war. It doesn't mention the breakfast, doesn't mention the choice he made at 24 that defined who he became. But at his funeral, 3 letters arrive from Japan, from Hatsuko, Kimiko, and Akari, remembering the morning that changed their lives. Section 10. The legacy of one breakfast today. A small memorial stands in Baguio, Philippines. It's not grand, just a stone marker in a park, easy to miss, if you're not looking for it. The plaque reads, in English, Filipino, and Japanese. In memory of those who chose mercy in the midst of war. April 1945. Most visitors don't know the story, but the ones who do, veterans, historians, descendants of those 24 women, understand what it represents. War brings out the worst in humanity. We know this. History teaches it relentlessly. Atrocity piles upon atrocity until the entire enterprise seems like proof of our fundamental savagery. But war also presents choices. Captain Robert Fowler could have executed those women. No one would have blamed him. No one would have known. It would have been the practical decision, the safe decision, the decision that fit the brutal logic of total war. He chose differently. Not because he was a saint. By his own admission, he wasn't. Not because he didn't understand the cruelty the enemy was capable of. He'd seen it firsthand. Not because it was easy or popular or guaranteed to work out well. He chose mercy because, in that moment, it was the right thing to do. And he was willing to face the consequences. That choice rippled outward. Intelligence gained. Lives saved. Protocols changed. More prisoners treated humanely because one captain set a precedent. Small ripples, but real. And for 24 women, it meant the difference between death at 23 and life long enough to become grandmothers. Hatsuko Nakamura died in 2003 at age 81. She taught English literature for 40 years, raised 2 daughters, lived to see 5 grandchildren. In her final interview, recorded for a university oral history project, she was asked what she wanted people to know about the war. She thought for a long moment, then said, "I want them to know that even in the darkest times, even when everything teaches you to hate, it is possible to choose kindness. One American captain chose kindness when he didn't have to. That choice gave me 58 more years of life. It gave my children and grandchildren their existence. Never underestimate what one act of mercy can do." The interviewer asked if she ever regretted surviving when others didn't. Hatsuko smiled, sad but certain. "Every day, but I honored their memory by living fully, by teaching others, by refusing to hate. That was my duty, to make their deaths mean something by showing that humanity survived." She paused, then added, "And by remembering that somewhere in Iowa, a teacher decided that his enemy deserved breakfast. That's the story I told my students. That's the story I hope continues." This is that story. The story of 24 women who knelt in the mud expecting bullets and received coffee instead. The story of one captain who remembered he was human when war tried to make him a monster. The story of a breakfast that stopped time and proved that even in total war, mercy is possible. If we choose it, if we're brave enough. Captain Robert Fowler was brave enough, and because of that, 24 families exist who wouldn't have otherwise. Hundreds of descendants spreading across the world, all because one man said, "Not today," to the logic of vengeance. That's the legacy. That's what one breakfast can do. In a world that still struggles with war, with dehumanization, with cycles of revenge and retribution, this story remains relevant. It asks us, when given the choice between cruelty and compassion, which will we choose? The easy path or the right one? Fowler chose right. The women he saved spent the rest of their lives proving he made the correct choice. And somewhere, in a park in Baguio, a stone marker stands as testament to the truth that humanity can survive even our worst impulses. If we let it, if we feed it, even if all we have is coffee and bread on a metal tray, offered at dawn to someone who expected death. Sometimes that's enough to change the world.